Hi, I'm Roy with Rugged Video, and today I'd like to take you through the Commander DVR. Today we'll be going through the functionality of the system, including the menu and the on-screen interface, all of the connections, which include connections to cameras, audio, triggers, and other expansion modules, the media, both USB and SD, and how you can use that, with the idea that you're going to know exactly how you can use the system with your specific application. Let's get started. Here we have a close-up of the Commander DVR. We're going to start by going through the connections. On the back you'll see a few different connector types. You have a 15-pin DE15, which is a D-sub style connector. You have your SDI input, which is on a standard HD quality BNC connector. You have your 6-pin connections, which can go to various connections, such as your audio, trigger, as well as regulated power to your camera. And then you have your power input. This is for external power. The system accepts anywhere from about 6 volts all the way up to 36 volts DC and is designed to connect to any unregulated aircraft power source. The DB style connector, which is the D15, has 15 pins that replicates all of the connections inside the audio, the trigger, and the camera input. It also doubles as the GPS input. So within this single connector, you're going to have all of your LEDs that are remoted, all of your triggers for recording, snapshot, and waypoint, and a secondary audio input, as well as the RS-232 for the GPS. Next to that is your HD video input. This input allows for connection from any HD SDI input source, which is 720p, 1080p, as well as the standard definition SDI signals. The camera connector supplies regulated power to the cameras themselves. This also features a composite output that would allow you to take the video that's input in HD quality, it crops it to standard definition, and can output that to a monitor or any EFIS flight display you have, such as like a G500 or a G1000, that allows for a composite input. There's also a trigger connection. This has your record, snapshot, waypoint, but it also features your record and fault LEDs, allowing you to remotely tell whether or not the system's recording or whether or not there's a problem. And lastly, you have your audio input. The audio input has your standard line level left and right, but it can also accept aircraft voltages. So we can connect that to a helicopter headset with the UN74 type plug, general aviation, amplified microphone, or an auxiliary input. And then we have our power input. We use a standard barrel type that makes it easy to connect to aircraft power. We usually recommend that that's wired to a non-critical breaker at about 5 amps or less. So we've gone through the connections. Next up, we're going to connect everything and go through the menu. So we have the system all connected here. We already went through the LED indicators. And now I'm going to go through the general menu navigation. So when you're on the main display screen, there's a couple things you can do with this front panel here. We have our power button, which you use to turn the unit on and off. You have a right arrow, a left arrow, a record, and a stop option. Now if you hit the record option, you'll get an audible indication that it's starting recording. And you'll get some additional information here in the top left corner. It tells you the duration of the recording itself. You have a record icon, as well as an estimated record time. Here it's listed at 5 hours and 9 minutes. So it takes the largest drive that's inserted, which is a 32 gigabyte drive, and the available space remaining, and tells you roughly how long that media is going to last. To stop recording, we hit the stop icon. Now when you're in this live screen mode, you also have some right and left arrows. If you hit the right arrow, that tells you firmware information. That might be helpful if you ever want to upgrade your firmware. We do have updates available. You can contact us and provide us with that information. We'll let you know if you have the latest firmware. You can also hit the left arrow, and that gives you information on all of the USBs that are connected and the space that's available on that specific drive. And there's also the menu itself. Now when you access the menu, you do so when you're not recording by hitting this stop icon. That brings up the menu itself, and then you navigate the menu with these arrows. Now the stop and record icons kind of change function when you're in the menu. The stop icon now becomes more of a select icon or an enter icon, and the record icon becomes a back icon. So next we'll go through the individual settings. We've connected up our unit with all of our various connections, including the camera video, regulated camera power. We have a GPS input as well as our external power. Right now we're using a wall power supply similar to the one that's included with all the systems. That allows you to bench test the system easily. There's also a trigger as well as an audio input. A trigger could be wired to something like this, which is our record stop start switch, and this has a built-in LED indicator that mimics this record light, which we'll go into in a second. That's handy to tell remotely what the system is doing. Let's say you have this mounted in a cargo hold or something where you can't see the screen. Now you'll notice a couple LEDs. We have a record LED, which is green, a fault light, which is red, which is not lit right now, and then your GPS light. So we have a solid GPS light, which means that we are getting valid GPS data. When that light is blinking fast, it means we are getting invalid data, but at least we're getting some data. And then if we unplug it all together, the light should start blinking, letting us know that we lost GPS signal altogether. This is helpful for a geospatial application, so you know that you're always getting a valid GPS signal while you're recording if you keep your eye on that LED. You also notice we have a few different flash drives plugged into the system. The system can record up to 4 USB flash drives. Because it's HD video and there's so many, the drives do have to be faster. To find out more information about what drives are tested and approved for the system, you can take a look at our website. Right now we use the SanDisk CZ80, which is available on Amazon, and it can accept up to 4 of these drives. And the way it records to these drives is that when you initiate a recording, it's going to duplicate that recording on all of the drives at the same time. If you're a flight tour, this is great because when you're done with the tour, you immediately have 4 copies of the video that you can sell to your passengers. If you're flying aerial patrol, you have 1 to give to the customer, 1 to keep for yourself, and then 1 possibly for a spotter. Now a little more about the LEDs. We'll first talk about this fault light. So what I'm going to do first is unplug our media here. And you'll notice we ended up with a blinking fault light, and it's blinking slow. What that is telling us is that, hey, there's no valid media in the system, and you'll also notice that a record light went out. That means that we cannot create a recording at this time. We can also learn a little bit more from this light. Let's say we lost a video input. You'll notice it'll go from blinking slow to blinking fast. That tells us not only are we missing media, but we also don't have a valid video input. And the last condition is, let's say we do have a flash drive, but we don't have video. So once it recognizes the flash drive here, and I lost video signal, you'll notice the light is solid. When it's solid, we know that there's no valid video, but there's valid media. And this is helpful, as I said, if you can't see the screen, it's mounted remotely, but we can remote these LEDs. These can be in a secondary panel or a switch like the one I showed you before. Now the on-screen display is also very helpful. You'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner, the capacities of the drive are going to appear. For instance, this drive has 26.77 gigs remaining, where this drive has 23 gigs remaining, and this was a 16 gigabyte drive that has 14.85 gigabytes remaining. And that information appears on the screen depending on what slot it's plugged into. In the top left, you're going to see your time and date information. In your top right, you're going to see power information. Now both of these say 100 and they have a plug-in icon. That means that the internal batteries of the system are fully charged and it's plugged into a wall power supply or an external power supply that allows for charging. It has two batteries because one powers the system itself, where the other one powers the USB hub inside. That means that if there's an external power failure, the system can safely stop recording and shut down. The internal batteries are also helpful if you want to play back video or go through menu settings, change things like that. Lastly, in the bottom left-hand corner, you have information about the video input itself. So it says here SDI. That means that it's a serial digital interface connection through the back, HD-SDI signal or SD-SDI. The resolution is 1080p, followed by H.264, which is the compression type, and then the bit rate, which right here it's listed as the maximum bit rate, which can vary anywhere from about 12 megabits per second all the way up to 18 or even 20 megabits per second, depending on the speed of the media and the amount of information in the image itself. And you'll notice we also have our live view. I can move our camera around here so you can see the live view on the screen itself. And lastly, on the front of the unit also accepts an SD card. Now it doesn't record video to this card, but it uses it for other important things. We use it to load firmware. We're constantly upgrading the functionality and features, and we send firmware to our customers. You simply put it on the card, stick it in the unit, and it'll update itself. This also contains information such as your pre-roll video, which is a little intro clip that's automatically placed in front of every single recording you take if that feature is turned on in the menu. This is where that resides. And then that just goes in a slot in the front here. And the slot is recessed, so you either need long fingernails or just a tool to put it in, but that card isn't replaced often. So we went through the general interface here, as well as the media. Next up, we're going to go into the menu itself. We're going to start by entering the video menu. So when the video icon is highlighted, we'll hit the enter button. And here you'll see you have different settings to set your record resolution, the system, which is the frame rate type that you're recording, the format, which is the type of compression. You can choose either H.264, which is the newer standard, or there's the older standard, which is MPEG-4, that's also available. And then there's also a signal type. You can choose between an HD-SDI or an SD-SDI input on this rear connector. To actually access the individual settings, we'll re-enter the menu here. Then you hit the stop icon. And then here you can actually cycle through the different resolutions. So you have 1080p, 1080i, 720p, 576i, which is a PAL standard definition signal, and then 480i, which is NTSC standard definition signal. We're going to set that to 1080, hit the enter icon, and then we'll hit the back icon to go to the next menu. Now under audio, you have the ability to either enable your audio as well as adjust the level of gain on that audio. Now the record menu has a lot of different options. Your first setting is quality, and that's the overall video quality, which is determined mainly by the bit rate that you're recording. Right now it's set to max, and in that max bit rate, we're going to record the maximum bit rate possible to these flash drives based on the speed and the information in the video itself. And you can decrease the bit rate if you want to lower the quality of your video and save file space. Otherwise, you can keep it set to max for the maximum video quality, even though the files are going to be a little bit larger. Now you notice the menu is timing out. You do have to go through these settings rapidly, otherwise it will time out on you. The next option is encoding. That can be either VBR or CBR. VBR is a variable bit rate. That means your bit rate, or the amount of data you're recording, changes based on the amount of information in your video, versus CBR, which is a constant bit rate, which just stays the same regardless. Generally speaking, for recording to media, VBR is perfectly fine. Then you have a mode option. And in this we have both manual as well as black box. And what that means is manual means that you're manually going to trigger a recording, where black box means that anytime the system is powered on, it's going to start recording. When external power is going to be removed, it will stop recording. There is a storage full option. Here you can select whether you want the system to overwrite the oldest file once the storage is full, or if you want it to just stop recording. Next, there's a GPS format option. You can choose both the GPX as well as the KML file. That's your 3D flight path information that's recorded as a companion file along with the video on all of the USB flash drives. And lastly, there's an option to turn on or off your pre-roll. Now, your pre-roll is a small clip that's added to the beginning of every video that you record. This is great for like an intro video. And then this is where you turn that feature on and off. The video itself, as I said earlier, resides on that SD card. Next, we'll go into the OSD menu. And OSD stands for on-screen display. Here you have the ability to turn on and off a wealth of on-screen information. You can turn on and off a full-color logo, which also is on that SD card, time and date information, your speed, altitude, heading, coordinates. Then there's also G-force data. So you can have XYZ current, your min and your max data, as well as custom data that you choose to overlay. Now, each of these settings has different format options, as well as different options for position. You can determine the X and Y coordinates within the video. You can determine the color, the overall size, and the format of the data itself. For instance, under speed, you have miles per hour, kilometers per hour, or knots. And you can do that for all of the various settings here. Next, we'll go into system, which is just the general system information. So you have a time and date, which you can set. A boot mode, which allows a lot of different boot mode operations. You have a manual. Manual boot mode means that you're manually going to turn the system on and off regardless of external power. On power means that whenever external power is on the unit, such as the aircraft powering up or down, the system is going to turn on or shut down without any user input. And lastly, there's power up, meaning that when aircraft power turns on, so does the system, and the system will stay on battery power even when aircraft power is turned off until you manually shut it down. So we're going to set that to on power. You also have the option to turn the LCD off or set it to a timer so that it turns off after a set period of time. You can flip it just in case you want to mount the unit upside down. You can turn on and off that audible indication. And then you have some settings for your GPS. This is your baud rate, which you can set depending on what system you're connected to. For a 1 Hz GPS, if you're using the Garmin 18X, it's 4800 for a baud rate. If you're using like a Garmin 696, usually that's 9600 for a baud rate. The 5 Hz GPS is 19200. And then if you're connecting to any of our Automator products that automates based on GPS, that is 384. And you'll notice the menu timed out again. Like I said, you've got to be quick when going through this. There's also an option for a GPS time sync. And what that does is take the time information from the GPS signal and synchronizes the system time with that time, which is helpful especially in the GPX file when you're recording that time information along with the video. Also, when you have a time date overlay, that allows you to coordinate multiple units in synchronous that can be mounted in even various aircraft. And you can coordinate those videos together using that timestamp. And then there's also a factory reset option. And lastly, there's a playback menu. So we can enter the playback menu, and then here we can either start playback. We can determine the actual output, whether we want it to display here or through that composite output. And then we can also delete all our drives. So if we start the playback menu, that'll actually go in the last file that was recorded. And you'll see the list here, and you can select whichever one you like to play back. And then these are all titled based on the time and date of that individual recording. And then we'll just go back to the main menu here. So that's all of the menu settings. Give you a rough idea of what the system can do and how it can be configured for a lot of different applications.